Let's see.
Do you want me to stop sharing, Kelly? Because I think you had
Yes,
some slides.
please.
I can.
Yes. All right. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're so excited that you're here for today's Alive Academy. We are joined by an amazing presenter. So you're in for a real treat today. Today's topic is navigating difficult situations, effective solutions for everyday challenges. And 2020 and 2021, this has never been a more relevant topic for all of us than it has been. So like I said, we're so thrilled to have Beth with us today. So I'm going to introduce her, and then I will kick things over to her to present. So, like I said, 2020, 2021 have been a hard years for us, for sure. But I'm thrilled that Beth's here because she has a lot of wit and wisdom to share. So Beth is the president of VQ Volunteer Strategies. She partners with organizations and their leadership to increase their impact through strategic and innovative engagement. She's the author of multiple books and articles on strategic volunteer engagement and is a popular speaker and trainer known for her interactive and inspiring presentations. And after today, you will see why. As a thought leader, Beth regularly participates in the national dialogue about volunteerism and engagement. And as a service enterprise trainer, she's also trained and supported dozens of organizations to become certified service enterprises. Prior to becoming a consultant, Beth worked as an executive director and a marketing director for education and faith-based organizations and spent years working with museums as an educator, manager, and anthropologist. So we are thrilled to have you with us today, Beth. A few housekeeping notes. We will be in the chat, so feel free to use that if you have questions or comments. Gretchen and I will be monitoring that throughout, and there will be time for discussion at the end. We'll have our presentation, like I said, questions and discussion at the end, and we'll also share some Alive announcements with you as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and especially Beth, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Kelly, for the warm intro. I'm going to get my slides up here and dive into this interesting topic. I'll just say that my contact information is here. You're welcome to connect to me or reach out with any additional questions. And thank you for spending some of your time with not only me, but also the Alive community today. As Kelly mentioned, this certainly has been an interesting year. The title being Navigating Difficult Situations. This isn't about necessarily pandemic-related difficult situations. However, I think that the conditions of the pandemic and other spotlight issues of the last that have come into focus this last year, and we're coming on just about exactly a year since things started shutting down, our everyday challenges continue to evolve. And what were challenges before have been replaced by different challenges, but that doesn't make them any less pressing. And yet some of the strategies that I'm going to share today, I hope will apply to challenges that we all faced back in 2019. Sticky situations and new ones that are emerging that will define our work in the months to come. Things like a volunteer who might be chronically late, a staff member who refuses to communicate effectively with volunteers, a volunteer who amid new COVID protocols keeps letting the mask drop below the nose, something like that, right? It's a long, different approach and different types of challenges, but I believe many of the strategies can be the same. These challenges that we face can be emotional, they can be stressful, they can be anxiety producing at worst, and at best they're still annoying, but I don't believe that they have to be. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is some areas where we can work to prevent or at least mitigate challenges, and then ways to react to them. And I like to start with this definition of, or this perspective on conflict, because part of the reason that many of us are reluctant to address challenging situations, sticky situations, is that it's conflict. And very few of us go into this work because we love conflict, right? I'm saying that's, I'm guessing, I don't know all of you, though I love seeing so many familiar names on the participant list. Nonetheless, I don't think most of you are folks who went into this because you thrive on conflict. Nonetheless, conflict happens, and what I love this perspective that conflict occurs when we demand and expect others to behave in a way that is not natural or known. When we understand conflict as something that is the result of individuals not having a shared understanding of what's expected, then it really sheds some light on ways that we can mitigate and also react to and address situations where there's conflict. So that's some of the philosophy that I bring to this topic. As we dive in over the coming 40 minutes, 45 minutes before we go for a more interactive Q&A session, I hope to cover these primary topics. I want to start with this idea, building on that concept of conflict arising out of expectations that aren't known, or I'll add to that, or shared. How can we set ourselves up for success? And when I say ourselves, I don't just mean us as professionals, volunteer engagement professionals, but also the volunteers with whom we partner. How can we set everyone up for success? What are some feedback models that we can use? And finally, a framework, kind of a classic framework in volunteer management for having difficult conversations, and hopefully making them less difficult with this approach. So those are the three main buckets that we're going to be approaching. So it's a lot in 45 minutes. So as I like to say, buckle your seatbelts. We're gonna go for a quick ride. How do we set ourselves up for success? Setting ourselves up for success in terms of addressing challenging situations and providing feedback starts long before a volunteer is scheduled, long before any of these behaviors even have time to seep out into the culture of our organizations. There are 6 building blocks that I like to think about that help us create a strong foundation to address difficult situations. That starts with, is the role strategic? What is the volunteer's role and position? Are we putting in place a thorough screening process that is equally applied? Is there thoughtful placement of the volunteer into the role? Have we clarified expectations? Is there sufficient training? Are we checking progress? And are we providing ongoing feedback? So let's take each of these building blocks quickly, but individually, because these really help create, as I've said, that foundation that will enable us to ideally prevent difficult situations or provide a reference point that helps us mitigate them if they come up. So we're going to start with strategic roles and thorough screening and thoughtful placement. Of course, anyone who knows me knows I'm a huge fan of position descriptions, and I won't spend a lot of time on this soapbox today, but position descriptions are really the demonstration whether or not a volunteer role is in fact strategic. Is it viable? Is it, as I like to say, does it pass the would anyone in their right mind want to do this role as a volunteer test, right? That's the litmus test that position description allows us to do or to assess. And as engagement professionals, whatever other aspects of your work are part of your job description, part of your title, whatever other hats you wear. And for many of us, those hats have been changing quite a bit since the pandemic has broken out. I think it's important to really consider not only are we familiar with the volunteer position descriptions, and is the volunteer who's filling this role familiar, but what about the staff who are engaging them directly in their departments, in their programs? Are they familiar with the position description? Who's responsible for ensuring that volunteers and the staff who directly support them and supervise them are familiar, so that they're really clear on what they can ask of volunteers, what's outside the scope of their work, and what can they refer back to if a volunteer isn't fulfilling duties or understanding the full scope of their work. For example, an example I like to use is from when I started in museums, and we back in the day changed the ticket taker's title and position description to museum concierge, or customer service, visitor service volunteer. And that really shifted the responsibility, as was indicated in the position description, from simply ensuring that every visitor who made it into the ticketed area of the museum was properly ticketed, to instead ensuring that every visitor had a warm and positive welcome into the institution. And some of the impacts and outcomes are that if they have a positive experience, if they feel welcome, they will return, they may join. It really ties that work from simply ticket taking to, of course, the financial sustainability of the organization. And so that affects training, that affects our ability to hold a volunteer accountable for not just clicking tickets or scanning tickets, but actually smiling, saying hello, and holding them accountable for that type of work. So position descriptions are key, as is recruitment, vetting, and placement. And what is everybody's role in this work? And are we taking any shortcuts, or are we actually ensuring that this process is thoughtful, intentional, and applied consistently across all volunteer applicants, not just, the old pulse test. Oh, someone raised their hand, they have a pulse, they get to take on this volunteer role or join this committee. Instead, we need to have an equitable, consistent, and thoughtful process for screening and placing volunteers. And again, when we think about our role as internal consultants, helping place volunteers and support other staff who are directly supporting and engaging volunteers in their programs and departments, what is their role? Do they understand how decisions are made about placement? Do they have a say? Should they have a say in who is engaged and screened and placed in their programs? If they don't want to be involved, do they have a say in what the criteria are and how decisions are made about screening and placement? That really helps mitigate some challenges later on. And we can probably all think of times when we have, for whatever reason, taken shortcuts in this and run into problems. When I was executive director of an educational organization that relied very heavily, its mission was not just education, but also volunteerism, we got a referral from one of our board members from a sister organization in another state for a young man who was going to be moving to our state and had been the program chair over at in his previous place of residence. And we said, great. We didn't interview him. We didn't check references. We thought, great, we got the reference. It's our board member. And so we invited this guy. He came, he accepted, and without going into it all, there were a whole host of problems, including, essentially him not doing his job and not responding. And finally, when we sat down and had coffee with him and said, there are these issues, and tried to have this sort of feedback conversation, to be honest, when he was asked to leave the position, he was relieved, it seemed. And we later learned that by having skipped that step, we obviously really created much bigger problems for ourselves, and unfortunately for him as well. We were able to save the project despite all that, but it became very clear that even our board member hadn't actually met this guy. We just assumed he had. Why? Because the guy never had even shown up to the program in his prior state. And so we really missed that step. You can tell I'm still a little traumatized by it by all these years later. And it's a mistake I won't make again. Okay, moving on, enough of that ancient history. Clear expectations and sufficient training, really, really important. And it follows from strategic roles and screening and placement. Onboarding is really all about setting expectation. And without expectations, we can have no accountability because there's nothing to hold people accountable to. So when we onboard volunteers, again, it's really important to ensure that they understand how they fit. Every volunteer, no matter their role, understands how they fit in the overall organization, understands the context for the work, has a chance to meet the larger team, and what are the expectations around policies and scheduling. In a COVID world, we have been forced, most of us, to really redefine and restructure many of our expectations around safety, around scheduling, around screening, daily temperature taking, et cetera. And so it's really important to think about, as we reopen, restructure, re-engage volunteers, as we begin to see the light at the end of this tunnel, what sort of retraining and onboarding do we need to do, even for our veteran volunteers, because the in-person volunteering that they're returning to will be very different, at least for a while. And so it's important not to miss this step. Training is, of course, equipping volunteers for success in their particular role. So as you begin to design or redesign role-specific training, think about, again, what are the roles of other staff members in training? I met recently with a CASA, a court-appointed special advocates organization, and they were talking about how all staff, not just the volunteer supervisors, are invited not only to attend training, but to fully participate so that they understand what the volunteers are being trained in, and can contribute to that so that they also establish that relationship that they're a content expert and can provide that sort of supervision to the volunteers in their work. So I'd love to do, and Gretchen, we were chit-chatting so much, I didn't ask, is the poll set up, or should we just do this as, looks like we might need to just do this as using the chat. I'd love to just see, maybe, unless there's a poll set up that I didn't know about, what best describes the role of department staff in your organizations in terms of screening and training? What if I add little letters here and people, oh, you have the poll, here it comes. Thank you, Gretchen, saving everyone. There's the poll. So which best describes the role of department staff? I screen, place, and train volunteers, then hand them off. You all should be able to weigh in on this poll now. I screen and place, and departments are involved in the training. Departments are involved in screening and placement, but I train. I collaborate on screening, placement, and training, or departments handle it all. So I realized there wasn't room for an other, and I'm sure there are those of you out there saying, well, it's not that, it's something different. So feel free to weigh in the chat if you wish. Otherwise, I think we'll give folks another couple seconds before we close. I'll just tap dance for another moment. And I think Gretchen will close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so here are the results. And I already see, oh, hi, Angela. Angela has volunteer leads who actually help with the training. Great. And what we see, and I'm sure that you're not the only one, but I'm glad you weighed in with that one because I didn't put that as an option. But our highest percentage, 36%, screen and place while departments are involved in the training, but not terribly far behind. Almost a third collaborate with departments to screen, place, and train. and about a quarter say, I screen, place, and train volunteers, then hand them off to departments. So what's interesting to me is that this is fairly evenly distributed, but nobody has departments doing screening and placement and you training. Not a surprise. That would be a little bit odd, but it's interesting. And still 10% of you have departments who handle it all. So I think it's just interesting to see how distributed is the model. And I think given that nearly everyone has, one second, I'm going to sneeze at some point. Sorry, everyone. What I'm seeing that I think is the biggest theme here is that other than that 10% that have departments handling it all, it is shared, whether it's fully collaborative or departments get involved in training, it is really important that departments understand how these decisions are made. So even for the nearly 1 in 4 of you who say that you screen, place, and train and then hand them to departments, to me, it's all the more important that departments understand how those decisions are made and are bought into those criteria so that they can support the work and feel supported in engaging the volunteers, knowing that they really kind of fit their criteria. So let's close that off. It should be hidden now, and we'll keep diving in. So let's go into checking progress. I'm going to talk a lot more about feedback in a few minutes and a couple different models for that. But of course, that is feedback can be much more informal. Checking progress really should be a scheduled and regular part of your support or the department's support. So here's an opportunity when we as leaders of volunteers can and should be talking with our department heads and ensuring that they have a plan and know how to check in on progress. Anytime a volunteer is placed, that individual and the team, whether it's a volunteer or staff member who supervises them, should understand and have a clear, common understanding of when they're going to meet, about what, and question that I learned from my mentor, what will we do if agreements aren't met? Now, that when it comes to volunteers who do sort of traditional shift work, maybe that's about ensuring that your handbook has a clear policy around how to, a ladder of discipline. If someone's late, this is what happens. If they're chronically late, then this might happen. But if it's a real partner volunteer, a skills-based, project-based volunteer who's partnering with you on an initiative or an event planning, for example, or doing some evaluation work with you, I really like this conversation, this type of conversation. What will we do if agreements aren't met? I like to think of this as the volunteer engagement prenuptial agreement, right? Like, how are we going to handle it if problems arise? And this is the type of conversation where you as a leader might say, look, we're coming up on my really busy season. If I fall off the radar and don't reach out to you as often and you need something, please ping me. And a volunteer might say, look, if I stop responding to emails, I really need you to pick up the phone because sometimes that just gets really overwhelming for me. It's a great time to really have the conversation about what's the best way to communicate with each other, especially if problems arise. So again, I think especially for skills-based partner types of relationships, that's a great conversation to have. And checking in with ourselves, doing a little gut check. Does the volunteer leader or perhaps an employee know what they're supposed to accomplish? Do they have sufficient authority to accomplish it? Do they have the skills and knowledge to succeed, or do we need to invest in some additional training or mentorship? Is everyone clear on how we agreed to measure success? And if they're succeeding, have we actually circled back to let them know? So all of these types of things really help set us up for success and set the stage for us to provide feedback and deal with challenging situations in a positive way, because all of this is about setting expectations, which is when we can refer what we need to refer back to if someone diverges from those expectations. So let's dive into this, the big topic of providing feedback. Why should we provide feedback? Well, providing feedback gives us the opportunity to share information and tools that will help individuals and teams reach a goal. It might help get an individual back on track or keep that person on track. It may maintain or fuel motivation, and it can certainly nurture team spirit. And this is true whether they're kind of direct service or operational volunteers, but also board members and committees as well, because feedback really is a way to provide information about how the work is going in relation to our established goals. Of course, we talk a lot about positive and negative feedback, or reinforcing feedback for that positive side and redirecting feedback in terms of that negative side. And even though I think all of us likely understand the value of that reinforcing feedback, that positive feedback, when we think of it as reinforcing and not just positive feedback, it helps us get beyond simple pats on the back of good job and terrific, and helps us move into something that is much more specific. Because terrific and good job, while nice and feel good, doesn't actually provide the specifics to reinforce particular behaviors. So think about the difference between good job and terrific, and great job describing that lunar landing, or thank you for noticing that Marco needed some help, or I loved how you answered those clients or patients or visitors' questions so thoroughly. Great work not getting distracted, even though there was a lot going on across the room. That's the type of feedback that's really going to hone in on a specific behavior that you would like repeated. I do believe that feedback can be really magical, and interestingly, there's some research out there that has identified feedback that has been deemed magical feedback, a very specific type of feedback. In 2013, a group of researchers from Columbia, Stanford, Yale, and a number of other universities published a study on the types of feedback that elicited the most effort toward improvement. This wasn't with volunteers, I understand, but I do think that it is, and have put into practice at the application of this magical feedback in volunteer arenas as well. So these researchers from this group of 10 or so universities had middle school teachers assign an essay to their students, after which students were given different types of teacher feedback. To their surprise, the researchers discovered that there was one particular type of teacher feedback that improved student effort and performance, so much so that they deemed it magical. Students who received this feedback chose to revise their paper far more than students who didn't. It was a 40% increase among white students, and actually, interestingly, given the importance of all of our efforts in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it was not a 40% increase among Black students, but a 320% boost among Black students. And it also improved their performance significantly. And in a phrase, here was what the magical feedback was. I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know that you can reach them. Daniel Coyle was a researcher who unpacked this complex study, and he says that these 19 words are powerful because they aren't really feedback. They're a signal that creates something more powerful, a sense of belonging and connection. So what are these signals? Well, they're threefold. The first is you are part of this group. Second, this group is special and we have high standards here. And finally, I believe that you can reach those standards. Coyle goes on to write, and I quote, "The key is to understand that this feedback isn't just feedback. It's a vital cue about the relationship, The reason this works so well has to do with the way our brains are built. Evolution has built us to be cagey with our efforts. After all, engagement, and he means that more broadly, is expensive from a biological standpoint. But when we receive authentic, crystal clear signs of social trust, belonging, and high expectations, the floodgates click open, unquote. So how can we relate this to volunteer engagement? Well, we create a community of volunteers, and in some cases, a community of volunteers and staff partnering together. So there's our group. How are we communicating that new volunteers, that veteran volunteers are part of this group? That B, this group is special and we have standards here. And when we share feedback, are we also communicating the trust that we believe you can reach these standards, you can achieve them? I saw this as an aside quite clearly when we were doing this research actually on behalf of American Red Cross, when we were doing some work on training staff members to support volunteers at Red Cross. It was around the time that my son, who's now in college, was in high school at an art school as part of a jazz band that competed around the country. And he was a junior at the time, and there was a freshman who made it into the top jazz band and was a drummer, and he was really short, so he looked really much younger. And I said to my son, how is it for this drummer, let's say his name is Paul, how is Paul doing with all these upperclassmen competing, going to New York, doing all this? And my son said, oh, well, you know, our director's really tough on him, and is, you know, says all the time, you know, Paul, we're relying on you. You set the beat, you do all of that. But and he's hard on him. But afterwards, we pull him aside and say, Paul, don't worry about it. He talks like that to everyone. You're going to do fine. You know, give it some more time. We know you're working hard, and you're going to be okay. And I thought, oh my God, that is absolutely the magical feedback all in place. And these peers, these older students were taking the younger students under their wing and really providing that sense of, you're part of us, we trust you, yes, there are high standards, but you're going to do it. And sure enough, he did. So as we begin to talk about methods of feedback, we also need to think about not just this framing. I'm giving you these comments because I have high expectations and I know you can reach them, but what are these comments, right? That's kind of the opening line. What are the comments that we're going to provide so that we can leverage this relationship and ensure that the feedback is, in fact, productive and effective? That's the word. So I want to share a different model that could follow the magical opening line of feedback. And that is the difference between feedback and a model known as feed forward, which I suspect many of us already employ naturally and without knowing there was a name for it. But I think it's helpful to tease out these different approaches. Traditional feedback tends to focus on the past and really focus on, you know, specific observations, performance problems. And let's face it, when we focus on the past, on what's already occurred, it focuses on things that can't be changed, as opposed to the infinite variety of opportunities that can happen in the future. So in that sense, traditional feedback can be very limited and static. Feed forward, which is a model written extensively about by Marshall Goldsmith, focuses on future actions and the potential for success. It's expansive, it's more dynamic. It focuses more on what people would like to change in the future and explores ways to translate that into goals and commensurate actions. So let's unpack this a little bit. Feed forward is a method that engages individuals in real conversations in which the person receiving the feedback or the feed forward can develop a plan that will improve performance in the future. So questions play a really key role in this process. They promote this dynamic dialogue and create space for collaboration on future success. Questions like, how can we discuss this issue in a solution-focused way? Or how could this conversation be most useful to you? You might lay out an observation and say, what insights did you gain from what happened when that patient was unhappy with that interaction, or you got really frustrated and spoke out to your mentee's parents or something like that. What have you learned from this situation? And most importantly, what are we going to do differently next time? How are you going to go about this? And how can I support you and help you achieve these goals? I think this last one is really important. This idea of how can I help and support you. When I worked in museums, one of my best managers always ended our meetings, our biweekly management meetings, with what do you need from me in order to be successful? And I've applied that question to all of my work when I'm managing and supporting employees as well as volunteers. In fact, about a year ago, I reached out to him and said, I tell this story about you all the time. I should really give you kudos, even though it's quite a few decades later. But here's what I took every time we ended a meeting, and he said to me, what do you need from me in order to be successful? It told me two things. One, I was expected to be successful, kind of like that magical feedback, like we have high standards and I trust you're going to achieve them. And two, I wasn't in this alone. He was there to help if I needed it, whether it was more training, different resources, championing my work to our CEO, whatever it was. And that's what I really like about this question, especially in combination with these previous ones. It's like magical feedback. You're not alone. You're part of a team. We have expectations of you, but we're here to support you if you need it. So why should we feed forward? I'm not going to dive too deeply into all of this, but there are lots of great reasons to take this approach. I want to be really clear. If a volunteer shows up with a gross violation of safety, security expectations and policy, I'm not talking about having a conversation, how can we help you not show up and steal from us in the future, or how are you going to not show up and be inappropriate and break all of our sexual harassment policies. There are certain clear-cut things that are not appropriate for feed forward, but when we're talking about more subtle, nuanced, coachable moments, this is a really valuable approach to take, because it brings the volunteer or staff member, team member into our work and helping to co-create the plan and thereby commit to it. I think one of the other pieces of feedback versus feed forward that is resonates with me, which is that it can really be more productive to help people be right than prove that they were wrong. And I think it resonates for me because it's very easy for me to go down that road of wanting to prove, hey, this was wrong and this was wrong, and here are all the reasons that I'm having this conversation with you, rather than saying, these were the expectations we set. Here's where we observed some challenges. How can we together create what can you commit to help get you back on track to meet our expectations for the information that you're sharing in our outreach programs, or for your safe compliance with COVID protocols, and et cetera. Of course, and we're going to get to this in a moment, none of this works if you're also not creating an action plan that has some accountability. So put an asterisk on that, because we're going to come back to that in just a moment. When do we have these conversations around feedback? I especially love this list from friend and colleague Deborah Grayson Regal about what are some clues that it's time to give feedback, whatever the method is. And she has a list. I've combined them into this collection here. Certainly, if someone asks for feedback, we should make the time to provide that feedback. If a problem is persisting, it's incumbent upon us and duty to our mission to provide feedback. If a volunteer, staff member, or other stakeholder complains or compliments someone, it's important to provide some feedback. If performance doesn't meet expectations, if you notice a volunteer doing something well, if a volunteer, this is a really big one that I think we often miss, and it's so important to sort of circle back around. If a volunteer has or hasn't made a change based on prior feedback, if feedback remains a one-time event, then it really isn't a process, it's just a one-time event. But we need to leave our feedback conversations with a plan for the future and make sure that we circle back with volunteers on that. So I think it's important to make sure that we're providing feedback and giving, closing that loop of, hey, you really did put those changes in place, or hey, we agreed that these things were going to happen and they still aren't. So now we need to go to step 2 here. But the last 2 are my favorite. If you find yourself thinking, I really don't want to have to deal with this, it's probably time to give feedback. Or you think to yourself, I can't believe I'm still dealing with this, it's also time to provide some feedback. We all know the warning signs of problems, and sometimes it's just easier to stick our head in the ground and not address them, but it's incumbent upon us to do that. Things like quality or quantity of work declining, a volunteer showing up late, dropping in enthusiasm, avoiding certain elements of the job. And why do we avoid it? Well, sometimes we avoid it and inadvertently become part of the problem by avoiding it, because we think a problem volunteer may reflect badly on us, because we want to be nice and give the volunteer another chance, because we don't want to be critical of a volunteer, or we just have a huge workload and have, too much already to deal with. But we need to overcome those, because letting problems fester only makes them bigger. And so it's helpful to think about and reflect on what's our own barriers, what stands in our way of providing feedback. So the last piece I want to share is a model that I really have found to be very straightforward, very helpful in really planning out some feedback conversations. Big fan of informal feedback, in the moment coaching, etc. But if there is a difficult situation, a sticky situation, or a one of these challenges that you really want to be thoughtful about and prepared for, here are a couple steps that I have found to really help me prepare for these conversations, and the same for my clients as well. First is a set of 3 questions that I like to reflect on. What's really happening, particularly in regard to the desired outcomes? And I'll explain that in a moment. Second, am I contributing to the problem? And third, what steps can be taken to improve the situation and ensure success? Let's unpack this first one. What's really happening? So, true story here, I was doing some work with a client a number of years ago and visiting some of their satellite locations to prepare for some larger consultation. And at one point, we were out on one of the satellite locations with a bunch of volunteers and their volunteer coordinator, who pulled me aside into, practically into a closet and said, Beth, I need some help. We have a volunteer on our team who has the most annoying voice. How do we deal with that? And I said, what? What's the issue? She has the most annoying voice and it drives everybody crazy. How do we deal with that? And I reflected on these questions. What's really happening, especially in regard to your desired outcomes? So I asked this woman, tell me, what does she say with this annoying voice? What does she do with this annoying voice? Oh, well, she interrupts all the time. Oh, okay, she interrupts. She doesn't listen to any of the more senior members of the team, and they've been here. They're experts. They're her mentors. They should be training her, but she interrupts and she doesn't. Oh, okay, she interrupts and she doesn't listen. She's not valuing the team. She doesn't want to put in her time. She wants to go ahead and start doing this. It had to do with some medical stuff, and they were very skilled volunteers. We're not sure she's really ready to do that, and she wants to skip the steps. I'm like, oh, okay. So it really isn't her annoying the tone of her voice, it's that she's interrupting. She's, when we ask the question around what's really happening, especially in regard to desired outcomes, the desired outcomes are that being a part of this team that is interdependent, it's important to respect other volunteers' experience. It's important to listen and learn. It's important to ensure that you are properly skilled before you perform these, it's actually veterinary medicine, not human medicine, before you perform this on some of the rescued animals. So, suddenly we were able to unpack this and get beyond just the tone of her voice and identify what the real problems were as they were as her behavior diverged from the expectations that were articulated in training and onboarding. So the coaching I gave was, okay, we need to focus not on her voice, but on her interrupting, on her not being a productive member of the team, not understanding or respecting the learning and training certification process, et cetera. So what's really happening, especially in regard to what was expected of the volunteers and what was instructed and shared during onboarding, during screening, onboarding, and training. Am I contributing to the problem? How am I undermining their success in some ways by not providing enough training, et cetera? And what steps can be taken to improve the situation? So these are reflections that I recommend we do on our own, and then, or maybe with a colleague, and then use a method that comes kind of from classic volunteer engagement. I went to my shelf and I pulled out this kind of Bible, Volunteer Management by Steve McCurley and Rick Lynch. They have in this book, which is classic, little old, but classic, still has some great resources in it. They have a method that they call RAP, Review, Analyze, and Plan. This is a great set of notes, and in fact, we have a handout which Gretchen can share that is a tool that you can use to walk through this process on your own to prepare for some sort of difficult conversation. I come up with notes. What are the points I could make about the expectations that have been communicated and agreed upon? Review the past is not let's dredge up every time somebody complained about XYZ. It's here are the expectations that were communicated about our culture of visitor service, about the importance of respecting confidentiality, about safety protocols. Analyze the present. What are the behaviors that we've seen or heard about, and how are those behaviors putting someone or something at risk or counter to the culture that we value here at our organization? And the most important piece is the P, plan for the future. What expectations do you have for the future? How and when will you check in on the matter? This handout, which I'll have a picture of in a moment, is going to be in the member file archive section. And so that's how it will be shared. It's not downloadable from the dashboard, but it'll be in the member file archive section. And if you have questions about that, I'm sure Gretchen can help with that. So one of the things you might want to do is maybe with your volunteer team leads, or if you have a staff, a team, is to go through, use this sheet, which you can access through the archive section, and think about some sticky situations. They can bring their own hypotheticals, or use some of these, which you'll have in the slides, that might be familiar, hypothetical, sticky situations, and then together in small groups, go through this process. First, consider what's the problem behavior, how does it conflict with expectations. Obviously, you might have to be a little creative if it's not a real situation in your organization, and then identify what's the desired change, and then that will really help you plan out the RAP, the review the past, analyze the present, and what's the plan for the future. Of course, how are we going to check back in on the matter is a key part of it, so it becomes not just a one-time event, but actually a performance improvement process. This is what the tool looks like, and again, I encourage you to use it with Certainly, if you have any situations you need to address, use it on your own, but also it's a great exercise with your team to try and turn this theory into practice and make it more part of your work at your organization. So before we leave and shift to Q&A, I'll just share a couple tips that come up from commonly when I do this session live and when we work with clients, and it comes from my years engaging volunteers, because there are some kind of stereotypical characters, let's say. We have resistors. We have veteran volunteers who might be reluctant to change. I think in a post-COVID world, you may be shifting protocols and practices, and there are some veteran volunteers who may challenge new processes or potentially rally others against change, hopefully not for safety protocols. And certainly for many of you who engage and support volunteers who are much older than you, there may be issues of veteran volunteers pulling rank. And so what are some of the strategies for these resistors? You might be part of a team, invite those individuals or a representative to be part of a team to provide input into the new policies. That isn't always an appropriate invitation for everyone, but for some it might be. Frame new policies and procedures around safety and efficiency, so people need to be recertified, reoriented, or as part of professional development. And if appropriate, maybe it's time to transition people to an emeritus role. What about the overloaders? These are the, oh, me, I'll do that. Volunteers who take on too much, who don't leave room for others to step in, who may or may not actually complete the work. Well, one of the strategies for overloaders is to be really upfront and discuss the importance of creating space for emerging leaders to step in and continue the work. You might need to build into your positions, especially if they're committee chairs, time limitations, or revise position descriptions so that a volunteer is responsible for training up their own successor. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Angela Williamson from Blood Bank of Delmarva, who's on the call. Hi, Angela. I hope it's okay. I'm going to share your piece that you have volunteer leads now of your canteens, and you've encouraged them to have an apprentice, I can't remember the exact word, or a co-lead, so that there's sustainability over time. And of course, it's really important that you have a screening process that is equitably and consistently applied for all positions, so that someone raising their hand doesn't necessarily mean they get it. Yeah, Angela confirmed its succession planning, and it's a co-lead. I love it. And finally, there's the Jekyll and Hyde, the volunteer who acts out behind your back, but never in front of you, and you just get these reports from others. So this is a real challenging one, because we need to honor both the volunteer in question and those reporting the complaints by taking both seriously. We need to do our research. We need to gather details, hopefully by observing the volunteer, share their feedback, listen to their perspective. And this is where it's really important to establish a plan of action and a deadline and follow up positively to say, great, thank you. You took that coaching and you're applying it, or we're still having this issue and we need to take some action. So with that, I'd love to open it up to Q&A and see, and I'll have Kelly weigh in, or Gretchen, whoever is going to monitor the question, and we will give it a few minutes, and then I'll do a few wrap-ups. There you are, Kelly.
This was fantastic, Beth. I'll share, I have been furloughed from my organization. So I have like a week and a half left on furlough, and it was just refreshing to hear a lot of this, and just that connection to even the frustrating parts of our job. There are also rewarding parts of our job, right? Like, we hear sometimes that managing volunteers is like herding cats, and it's not, it shouldn't be a negative. We get to work with a lot of people, and in doing so, we can make an incredible impact on our organizations, for sure, but also on the individuals that we get to lead. And that's a great responsibility that we have. So thank you for sharing a lot of strategies for how we can tackle the difficult things that come up, because they may not be our favorite parts of our job, but I think that there are opportunities where we can really shine. So thank you. If anyone has questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and I will share them out. So I'll share our first one is from Karen. It says, our sticky situations tend to deal with soft skills such as inclusive language, etc., and resistance from some volunteers to what they consider politically correct language in a negative context is the way that they see it. Is there a good template for a training regarding respecting cultural communication?
I would say I have two thoughts on that. I mean, and thank you. It's an excellent, timely, really timeless question. And I would say, first of all, anyone on this call who has recommendations, please pop that in the chat. We'll read them aloud because you all are your best resources on that. And the other piece I'll say, while I don't have a specific curriculum or template to recommend among the leaders, and I know there are many who are addressing this, MAVA, the Minnesota Association for Volunteer Administration, has really been doing a lot of work. They have a dedicated staff member, a new one as well. Lisa Joycelyn was there for a long time, and they just hired and onboarded a new person yesterday, I think. So I would look at MAVA and some of the resources that came out of their conference on dismantling inequities in volunteerism last November, and their website. And otherwise, I invite others to share on that, because I think it's an important question. And Gretchen just added MAVA's website to the chat, mavanetwork.org. Great. Other questions, Kelly?
So I don't see any others that have come through yet. Oh, no, here we go. Adrienne said, I have a volunteer who is an energy vampire, very negative. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't. Great term.
She provides us with lots of feedback, but is incredibly defensive and combative. She's been around for a long time. She's a resistor and takes up many roles and shifts. The overloader. Yep. Outside of hiring her, is there a way I can even start a conversation with her about taking staff feedback?
Well, I applaud your honesty and your wanting to tackle this. It's a challenging situation that I suspect many on the call are nodding and saying, "Oh yeah, we have one of those." And I'd say a couple things. First, perhaps start with a little bit of the magical feedback. Hey, we have high standards here. You're part of this team. We want to share some feedback, and we know if you're committed that you can. I forgot the 19 words, but you can do it. We have faith in you, but we need to have a conversation about some things. And I think that I would also say we have a you understand the value of providing feedback, and part of that is it's a two-way street, and we need to be able to go two ways. So here's some observations, and I would use kind of the RAP method. I would also make sure that you follow up with that person and have a follow-up plan. And finally, I think it's really, really important that when I don't know that you're perseverating over this, but I know a lot of people who perseverate over the possibility of letting go a long-time volunteer, and we think about all the things we risk losing by letting go of a long-time volunteer, but we have to remember that we have to think about what we've already lost because of that person's negative energy. And so there may be many things to gain, and it really may be a benefit to everyone if it's time for that person to leave. So think about that too. And I know that there's supposed to be announcements, so I'm going to be quiet and turn it back over to Kelly. I'll just leave you with this great thought. It's not just about responding to sticky situations. Wisdom is trying to avoid them by putting all those other things in place. So, so we have to be doing those two things at once. And I'll turn it back over to Kelly. Thank you for this chance.
Thank you, Beth. If anyone has not seen Beth's videos from 2020, your past self, future self, those, I think that's really relevant because there are so many things that you said today that I was thinking of kind of the tip of what are the things that your today self can do to set your future self up for success.
Right.
And there were so many of those of like, yes, this conversation is probably not going to be a fun one to have, but if I have it now, it stops it from festering, and you don't have that like mental anxiety around, oh, I've put this off for so long, I'm going to continue putting it off, and it's taking up space in your brain. So really, really great presentation today, Beth.
Thank you.
All right, we are gonna share a few updates. So we have a couple announcements. We have more Alive Academies happening soon. In April, we have a great one coming from 3 of our programs and advocacy team members, as well as some of our board members. So Paula, Emily, and Nicole will be bringing you a presentation on April 23rd on Make It Personal, Building Inclusion in Your Volunteer Corps, Practical Exercises, Success Stories, and Cautionary Tales. So to that question of, some of your volunteers who may have some cultural sensitivities, this would be a great one to tune in for. And then May 12th, Alana will be bringing us saying no to the wrong things so we can say yes to the right things. So really great topics coming your way. We hope you'll join us.
Uh-oh. Is it just me, or did she freeze for everybody?
I think she froze for everybody. I will finish up while her bandwidth comes back. Sometimes that happens. And to say, I think we have all of our slots filled for 2021 for Live Academies, and we'll be actively looking for presenters on any topics in 2022, and you can find a link to that on our website. And I'd like to invite everybody to our networking event on March 9th, and looking forward to seeing everybody come. Here she comes. Go ahead, Kelly.
You froze and we lost you, Kelly. Sorry to talk over you. And now you're muted.
Well, the challenge of doing all of this from home as opposed to in the office, but yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
We will go ahead and end there. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And Beth, thank you again so much for being part of our Alive Academy presenters. I learned a couple things new. Thank you very much. So round of applause.
Thank you.
Have a great week, everybody.